Good evening and welcome to the Culture Creators Townhall 911 Suicide Prevention Summit. I'm your host and moderator for the evening, Shanti Das. I'm the founder and CEO of Silence the Shame. On behalf of Culture Creators, we would like to welcome you to a very serious conversation and an important one on suicide prevention on behalf of Culture Creators. To give you a little bit of background information on myself, I've worked in the entertainment industry for over 25 years at record companies like LaFace Records, Arista Records, Columbia, and Universal Motown. I had a really great run in the entertainment industry, but decided to walk away at the height of my career in 2009. I was executive vice president of marketing at Universal Motown. And I just had a lot of different things that were going on in my life. My uncle had passed away, who was like a father to me. My mom was developing Alzheimer's, and I was suffering from serious depression and didn't know what to call it. And I failed to mention that my father died by suicide when I was 7 months old, and my mother was left to raise three young kids on her own. Fast forward, as I was back home in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, in 2014, my best friend took her own life. And in 2015, I had serious suicidal ideation. I had counted up all the pills in my medicine cabinet, and it's nothing I'm proud of, but also nothing I'm embarrassed about or ashamed about. And I'm grateful that I'm here tonight, February 15th, 2020, and I live to share my story and to honor all that I have been through and so many other people that have contemplated suicide. So again, it really is humbling and a complete honor to be here as I do this work around suicide prevention. And now with my foundation, Silence the Shame, we aim to educate communities, especially communities of color, around emotional health and wellness. And so I want to thank Joy Brown and everyone at Culture Creators for realizing the importance of this conversation, especially in terms of what's going on right now in our communities. So I have the distinct honor to introduce four experts in the field of psychology, psychiatry, and wellness. Dr. Angela Anderson, who is an executive coach and author, Purvis Taylor, who is a life coach, mental health advocate, and author, Dr. Cynthia Lewis, whom I've worked with quite a bit, who is a psychiatrist, and Dr. Jennifer Tucker, who is a psychologist and also works at New York City Children's Center. So first up, please welcome Purvis Taylor. Purvis, please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Shanti. It's an honor and privilege to be on the stage with my esteemed panelists. I am Purvis Taylor III. I am a certified award-winning celebrity life coach, speaker, guest lecturer, mental health advocate, author of the two books, Survival Mode and Heal Forward, books on Black men's mental health. And I'm also co-founder of Alchemic Solutions, a program that's based here in New York that teaches young men of color how to develop and cultivate emotional intelligence.
Thank you so much, Purvis, for joining us and for the critical work that you do. Next, we have Dr. Jennifer Tucker. Jennifer, please tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I am Jennifer Tucker. I'm Director of Admissions at New York City Children's Center. It is a psychiatric facility providing inpatient and outpatient care for children and adolescents in the 5 boroughs of New York. And I have many years in the field specializing in trauma, sexual abuse, and severe psychiatric illnesses among children. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tucker. We really appreciate it. Next up is our executive life coach, Dr. Angela Anderson. Welcome, Dr. Anderson.
So thank you so much, Shanti. My name is Dr. Angela Anderson. As you mentioned, I am internationally certified as an executive coach, speaker, and trainer. Spent many years working in clinical psychology and acute inpatient psychiatric care. Also, #1 international best-selling author of Now What? Get Over Yourself and Move. So very excited to be a part of this very important conversation.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for the critical work that you do, Dr. Anderson. And last but certainly not least, let's welcome Dr. Cynthia Major Lewis, a psychiatrist who is also a friend of Silence the Shame. And we love and appreciate all the work that you do as well. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm getting a little feedback when I'm talking, but I am Cynthia Lewis. I'm an assistant professor and director of adult emergency psychiatry services at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I am an emergency room psychiatrist. I was a community psychiatrist Many people are often in crisis. I am happy to be here, and with the recent string of high-profile suicides, we know that suicides can sometimes come in clusters, and that can even be a risk factor for more suicides. So I'm honored to be here with the panel so that we can help educate those who are joining us today. And again, I'm honored to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. And again, let's give our panelists a virtual round of applause for joining us tonight for this important conversation. There's a little blurb that I want to read. Suicide is a major public health concern. In 2019, it was the 10th leading cause of death. The first step in suicide prevention is education. Suicide is when people harm themselves to end their life and pass away as a result. A suicide attempt is when they harm themselves intending to end their life and they live. And so tonight we want to make sure that there are no completions of suicides, and the more we can do to educate and empower our communities, the better off we will all be. And I also want to just say some of the content tonight that we may mention could be triggering for some. And so if you do feel that you are triggered, I want to make sure, and we can put it in the chat, that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is 1-800-273-TALK. Again, that is 1-800-273-TALK or 1-800-273-8255. I personally used that number in 2015, and so I encourage anyone that may be in crisis to use that number. So we're going to jump right in. I want to direct this first question to either Dr. Tucker. We'll start with Dr. Tucker and then Dr. Lewis. What are some warning signs of suicidal ideation? Is depression the only symptom that can lead to suicide? And can marijuana or other substances be contributing factors to suicidal ideation? Dr. Tucker.
Good questions. So some of the warning signs, and I will speak from the perspective of somebody who works with children and adolescents. Some of the warning signs that you want to look for would be sadness. Is the child suddenly teary? Are they easily upset by, the slightest incidents? Look for changes in eating, changes in sleeping. Are they suddenly more anxious than they used to be? Are grades dropping, especially for students that used to do very well, high performers? Are their grades suddenly, tanking? You want to look at the reasons why for that. You want to look at whether or not the child is having angry outbursts out of the blue. Other things you can look for would be, and this may be more with adolescents, substance use, lots of alcohol, drugs, and you'd be surprised at the drugs that kids can get their hands on now. I see a lot of that. Look for the content of their speech. Are they suddenly talking about being hopeless or feeling helpless or feeling as if they're not worthy of special things, not worthy of friendship? Are they isolating themselves? Are they suddenly no longer in touch with, their closest friends who they were once on the phone with every night? Are they staying in their bedrooms and sort of locked away from the family? Isolation is a big, big sign. So you want to look for that. Are they sleeping, excessive hours or not sleeping at all? I think I mentioned just general sadness and anxiety. Those are some of the things that you want to look for. Just be alert. The biggest thing that I would say is just look for a significant change in your child. You will notice what's going on. You are the expert on your child. So be aware, you know what baseline is for your child, you know what's normal for them. And when you see them veer off that course, then, pay attention to that, sit them down and talk to them and try to figure out what's behind that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tucker. Dr. Lewis, would you like to add anything to that? I think you're on mute, Dr. Lewis. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I did want to add that initially you asked if depression was one of the only risk factors for suicide. And we do know that having a mental illness, usually mood disorders like bipolar disorder or depression are one of the main risk factors, but also other, mental illnesses like anxiety, even post-traumatic stress disorder, alcohol use disorders and substance abuse disorders. Depression has the highest, risk for suicide, but we have to keep in mind that all forms of mental illness can put someone at increased risk for suicide. Dr. Tucker did a great job of looking at mentioning some of the warning signs that we look at in individuals. I would also add that when people start talking about not wanting to live anymore, if they start, kind of making plans where they're talking about making bills or kind of giving positions away, if they're starting to, if they have personality change, those are some more warning signs that you can look out for someone who well. That's a trigger for you to start maybe inquiring more about how your loved one or that person that is doing.
Absolutely. Thank you both. All great information. I'm going to go back to you quickly, Dr. Tucker. Why does it seem that there is an uptick in the number of suicides we hear about lately? What do you think is contributing to this factor? And does everyone who died by suicide have a mental illness?
I think that it seems like there's an uptick, but I don't think that there is in terms of very recently, because rates have been going up within the African American community for about the last 2 decades, actually. And I think that what we are seeing is that there have been some high profile suicides of celebrities that are getting a lot of media coverage. So I think that's making us more aware and may make it seem like this is sort of happening all of a sudden. But research actually does show that rates have been going up, especially for children. And rates are now almost double what they once were among African-American children, let's say 15, 20 years ago. So that is very concerning. And then ask me your next question again. I'm sorry.
Does everyone who died by suicide have a mental illness? Because I know that sometimes it could be situational, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the person has a mental illness, but it could be a traumatic experience or something that's been happening in your life. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, please?
Sure. Actually, Shanti, I think you did a good job of elaborating on it yourself. That was a great point. Some people who complete suicide, yes, they are suffering from a particular mental illness, but others, it could be situational. And it could be that just in that moment, they did not know how to respond to the overwhelming grief and despair that they were feeling. But regardless of what the cause is, there is help and there is hope. And that's why we're all here tonight, because, we can help people, we can reach out to them, we can give them the tools and resources to be able to deal with those feelings in that moment, no matter if the feelings are, if what's at the root of those feelings is a mental illness or a temporary despair related to a situational event.
Absolutely. And just from a personal perspective, the night that I was in crisis, I think I had been dealing with this for so many years. I was not clinically diagnosed with major depression, but just, everything that had happened. And then with my friend's suicide, I just felt so hopeless. And I'll tell anyone that's listening, because sometimes people often say, oh my gosh, how could you be so selfish and want to take your own life? And I'll just tell you that, I wasn't in my right frame of mind. And it wasn't that I wanted to die. I just wanted the pain to go away. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's very important that if there's a loved one or someone or colleague or, a client or anyone that you're dealing with, try to come from a place of empathy, right? And not sympathy. We don't need you to feel sorry for us, but we do need you to kind of understand that there's a lot of pain that's going on right now, right? Whether it is something that is clinically diagnosed or situational. So let's give each other enough grace and space to be able to open up and have these safe places where we can dialogue. I want to quickly reset the room again. Welcome to Culture Creators Town Hall. We are ringing the alarm tonight, 911, suicide prevention, and particularly in the African American community. It's so important that we have these conversations. And we have an esteemed group of panelists here tonight. And so next, I would like to go to you, Purvis. Can you tell me, do men and women handle mental illness differently? And if so, how?
Oh, that's a very good question. And before I answer that, I want to make the statement that, we're not monolithic, right? So I can kind of speak to segments, right? Because I want to be very careful with what I say. But to answer your question, 70% of suicides are committed by men, So that in part answers part of your question. In my work of wellness and mental wellness and doing this work for over 10 years, I found that the women that I've worked with or the women that I've encountered, they are more intentional about seeking help, more intentional about healing. And and seeking whether it's traditional therapy or finding other wellness modalities, being communal. I found that a lot of women that I've worked with have community, they have lifelines, they're not afraid of being vulnerable. Whereas men, on the other aspect, a lot of men don't have the emotional intelligence, don't necessarily have the emotional lexicon to even contextualize their experiences. A lot of men self-medicate. A lot of men feel that they don't have safe spaces, and a lot of men, grapple with the word vulnerability. They tend to look at the risk factor of vulnerability as opposed to the reward factor, meaning that on the other side of that risk is the reward of getting the healing that you need. And so, there's definitely been a disparity between men and not even just mental health, but even going to the doctor. We all know a lot of men who are afraid to go to the doctor. So there's a lot of, there's a great tension between that. So definitely there is, in my experience, there's a distinction between how men and women respond to mental illness.
Absolutely. I am glad to see some of our men, especially in the public eye, opening up, to your point, and kind of being more vulnerable. I think, some might still be afraid, if you will, to be vulnerable, especially even on the timelines. But we have such great organizations like Black Men Heal and a lot of others that are out there doing.
Black men.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, therapyforblackmen.org, another wonderful resource. So thank you for that, Purvis.
No problem.
Dr. Lewis, I'd like to go back to you. Do you think people of color are at a higher risk of following through with suicide? And why do you think Black and Brown communities are experiencing mental health issues at a higher rate?
Black and Brown people aren't experiencing mental health issues at a higher rate. Actually, our rates of mental illness and our rates of suicide are actually lower than the US population. But we are starting to see an uptick in our rates of suicide. Our youth, we've had an explosion of increased suicides in our youth, with the pandemic. Even here in Baltimore, there was a study that showed that Black and Brown people, we committed suicide at higher rates once the pandemic started, which was startling, given we're usually lower than the US population. The death of George Floyd, which really helped people to start recognizing that the impact of violence and trauma and systemic racism, we're starting to see that now I think we're protected in the past with just kind of having to be strong all the time, and our religion, our religious background and affiliation. But we are starting to see an uptick, which is really what's concerning, that some of the protective factors that were in place that kept us at lower rates are starting to be impacted, and we're starting to see an explosion. I agree that part of this discussion got generated once we saw some high profile suicides. And, again, I think the alarm was sounding, and we know that rates are going up. So fortunately, we're still at lower than the US population, but we are starting to see an uptick in increased rates of depression, increased rates of suicide. So the alarm is being sounded.
Thank you. And thank you for that clarification. Dr. Tucker, did you want to add anything to that?
Just to note that for children and adolescents, our rates are now listed as higher. So that's a significant concern. One thing that I'm very glad that Dr. Lewis mentioned is just the trauma that comes from systemic racism that we all deal with. And we have for so long, we are strong people, yes. And there is, lots of Black girl magic and plenty of Black boy joy to go around. However, that in itself can be a big burden, because when we tell ourselves that we have this magic, which we know we do because it's helped us survive so much, but it's still a lot that we have to deal with. And we have to remember that, yes, with this magic and this joy, we are still human. And with that humanity comes regular feelings and emotions. We can be just as overwhelmed as the next person can. We can be tired at the end of the day. We can be stressed out. We can be sad.
Yeah.
And we have to really be careful and make sure that we don't say to ourselves or convince ourselves that we are, somehow above becoming depressed or sad when times get rough. We are people, and we're going to experience the full range of emotions. So sometimes when we have told ourselves or told each other that we are above that, and then we suddenly feel low, we don't know what to do with that anymore. And then that's when people really start to panic, and they may overreact in their response to it. So just want to point that out also.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's shame attached to that.
Say
I'm
that.
sorry. Go
There's
ahead,
shame,
Purvis.
there's shame attached to that, what you were saying. I'm just adding on to what you were saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And we put these unrealistic goals of perfectionism, right, on ourselves and in our lives and communities. And I think if nothing else, with the pandemic, I think we've all had to kind of sit in our feelings quietly, right, at some point or another. And so many of my personal friends and family members are coming to me. They know I work in mental health and I do this work, but we don't always have this conversation over dinner and so forth. But they're like, oh my gosh, I've experienced anxiety for the first time in my life. And so people are understanding that we all have mental health. We may not all have a mental illness. And
Yes.
to your point, Dr. Tucker, we need to pay attention to that. And we need to make sure that, self-care isn't just something, a term, right, or a hashtag that we're throwing out on Saturdays and Sundays. Like, it's cool to post about it, but self-care really should be incorporated into our daily regimen, just like we all have, these busy calendars, and we marked our calendar for 8 p.m. for this incredible, town hall. We need to make sure that we're taking time and incorporating breaks into our schedules and really being realistic about what mental and physical wellness looks like in our daily lives. So thank you for that, Purvis and Dr. Tucker. I'd like to go next to Dr. Anderson. And I want to say, Dr. Tucker, or I think you might have alluded to this about the high profile suicides that we've experienced recently in society. We've seen many high-powered executives and high achievers die by suicide. Recently, even in Atlanta, the CEO of MARTA, our transit system, God rest his soul, literally stepped in front of a train and took his own life a few weeks ago. How hard is it working and being mentally well in high-stress jobs, Dr. Anderson?
So it's stressful just like any job, but I think there are these additional factors that we have to contend with, right? To hear Dr. Tucker's perspective was so refreshing, just to say out loud that we aren't robots. And even though we have these expectations and priorities at work, we're still people. And so particularly in the work that I do, which is in the area that you're talking about with executives, I like to use acronyms really to give them a quick tool that they can put in place when they find themselves feeling overwhelmed or anxious. And so I use the acronym PAUSE. And the very first thing is P, and that's prioritize self-care. And I don't mean, like you were saying, Shanti, the manis and the petties and the things that we think about when we hear self-care, but taking those mindful minutes during the day, putting 10-minute breaks between your meetings, making sure that you have lunch, that you stand up and step away from your desk. If you're at home, that you step outside from time to time. A, which is being aware of the things that you have available to you to help you at work, the resources. So if it's EAP, if it's support groups, if it's taking your time off, taking your vacations. A lot of times in corporate America, people will say, oh, I waited all year before I took a vacation. That isn't the culture that we want to create. We want people to understand the importance of taking those breaks. You, for pause, use your voice. If you need help, say so. If you need assistance, say so. And don't wait until you have to ask, right? So be self-aware. S, which is my favorite, set healthy boundaries. So if you can, I know when you're an executive, you have all of these demands, but you're still a person. You have other people in your life that are depending on you to be present as well. So turning those devices off, not checking email during dinner, not sleeping with your devices in the room with you, really setting those clear boundaries and knowing when to step away. completely, or at least for a few minutes, to just reset and refocus. And then lastly, the E in pause, and that's eliminating any guilt that you may feel when you take those breaks, because that's a part of it too. We don't want to step away because we feel guilty for doing it. And sometimes the environment that we're in makes us feel guilty for doing it. But if you don't do it, you won't be there to carry out the great work that you're committing yourself to. So balance is critical. So just pause.
Thank you. I love those pause. I need to incorporate that into my schedule. Thank you for that. We have to maybe put that in the chat room. Purvis, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something really quickly, because we've tossed the word around self-care a lot, right? That's been the buzzword for the last 2 years, and really for me, self-care really begins with self-knowing. Right? Many of us, the beautiful blessing of the pandemic is that it caused us to be introspective, whether we wanted to or not. Right. And so that's the beginning of true self-care, is knowing yourself, taking a deep dive into yourself, asking yourself questions out of curiosity, not out of shame or judgment, but really taking a deep dive into you, so you know what you actually need to do to take care of yourself. I just wanted to add that, because I think that, I think many people result to mani-pedis because they don't know themselves. And so, like, you really got to take a deep dive into who you are. So I just
100%. Thank you for that. And I think fear, right, is what causes us to not pause, if you will, and do that self-reflection, because I think we might be afraid of, what we'll unpack, if you will.
Absolutely.
But you got to do the work.
So one more thing to consider, which I think when Purvis said this, it just sparked this. Right now, things are different, more different than they've ever been. We used to have that buffer between work and home, the commute and things of that nature. But a lot of people are working from home now. And so those boundaries aren't as clear anymore. The stress that you would have in the workplace is now in your home. And so it's hard to really draw those lines between what is work and what is home. But it's critically important that we have self-awareness, to your point, Purvis, so we can make sure that we set those boundaries specifically in our homes as well.
Absolutely.
Amen to that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson and Purvis. Next, I want to go back to you, Dr. Tucker. What are some possible warning signs that children may exhibit, or adolescents, if they are in crisis or contemplating suicide?
Thank you for the question. We touched on it a little bit, before at the onset of our panel here today, but you can look for things like sadness, withdrawal, isolation, especially from peers, because we know that kids and teenagers love to be around their friends. So if they're suddenly not interested in them anymore, that's a big sign. Look to see if they are no longer as interested in things that they really used to enjoy. If they were a big fan of sports or dance or cheerleading or anything like that, and then suddenly they just don't want to do that anymore, and there's nothing replacing that. Kids bounce all over the place. So if they suddenly go from loving music to wanting to do tap dance or wanting to play baseball, then that's fine. But if they were, an athlete that loved to play baseball and basketball and football, and then suddenly there's just no interest in any of that anymore, and there's nothing replacing it, that's a concern. Children may also, sadness, depression may manifest in children in acting out behavior. So you want to look for that too. A lot of tantruming that you just can't really, quite put your finger on. You can't quite explain where this is coming from, or it may have a different quality to it than it has before. Those are some of the things that you can look for with children, some warning signs.
Thank you so much. Did you want to add anything to that, Dr. Lewis?
Yeah, I would. Children, again, increased substance use, increased alcohol use. Children do present differently than adults. Adults, depression looks different than in children. Children a little bit more irritable. They can have tantrums. Again, they can start isolating. They can start withdrawing. They can start hanging with the wrong crowd. Again, I think the main message is that your child, your loved one, when they're doing things that are their typical, and when they're doing things that aren't their typical. And that's when it's really important to ask the questions, to not beat around the bush, ask, okay, what's going on? Should we be concerned about anything, and kind of, be direct, should I be worried about how you're feeling? Are you having any thoughts? Have you ever thought about harming yourself? Some kids engage more in eating disorders, things like that. Those can be warning signs. But you want to be direct and say, have you ever had any thoughts of wanting to harm yourself? The symptoms that Dr. Tucker was describing, and then some of the changes that you see, those are kind of just red flags. And the concern is that when we see these red flags, we don't act on them, and we're afraid to ask the question, because a lot of people fear that you ask the question and that makes someone want to then take their life, when actually it's you ask the question so that hopefully they can be honest and open up to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. That actually takes me into my next question. But before we do that, we're a little bit over 30 minutes in to the program. We hope you all are taking notes and really absorbing all of this important and critical information that we are giving you this evening. Again, this is the Culture Creators Town Hall 911 Suicide Prevention. If you do have any questions, for those of you that are viewing right now, please make sure that you put your questions in the chat, and we will weave them into the conversation. Actually, I see that we do have one question. So panelists, if you don't mind, because this is a community conversation, if you will, I'd love to incorporate this next question. So I will kind of open this up to the floor, and just kind of raise your hand if you like to answer. Are we coming into the churches to help assist with mental health of people in the community? Pastors are often overlooked too, but are often not equipped to take on the load from both an educational basis and bandwidth. What would you suggest for this in dealing with the masses? Who would like to take that? Purvis?
Well, I've actually done work around this. So I forgot to state that I do have a master's in clinical psychology. I forgot to state that at the beginning. But I actually do work with some churches and some pastors who are beginning to integrate, because you need the spiritual and you need the mental, and you know what I mean, working together. And so I think a lot of, and as we know, a lot of pastors have high suicide rates as well. As of recent, a lot of pastors are leaving the faith, leaving their jobs. And so I think that a lot of pastors are now understanding that there's a both and, not just the either or, right? And so, I think I do workshops at churches all the time around mental health. I encourage pastors to take courses or take certain certifications around mental health, so that they can be aware, and also have para organizations that they can partner with, so that not everything is always a demon. Sometimes it's mental health, right? And so I think a lot of organizations are doing that. They're partnering with known reputable mental health organizations.
Thank you for that. And I'll just also add that my organization, Silence to Shame, I would. If I could just finish really quickly, Dr. Lewis, I was just saying that my organization, Silence to Shame, has done a lot around faith and behavioral health. We work with a lot of pastors as well. Purvis, we should definitely talk, and maybe we can collaborate. But I'm a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and when I was going through my own suicidal ideation, I mentioned that I called the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but then I also texted my pastor, Dr. Raphael G. Warnock, who's now Senator Warnock, and he said to me, "I'll pray with you, but you got to go to the doctor." And so I was just so grateful that he encouraged me to see someone, like Dr. Lewis. And so I did see a psychiatrist, and I got on my antidepressants. But to that point, so many more churches now are getting in-house counselors, actually licensed professional counselors, not just, a regular counselor that is not certified. And so I'm really happy to see that. And I think, a lot of the congregations are really coming and asking for help and assistance. And so you will see more collaborations with mental health organizations and the faith community. I'm really happy about that direction. And certainly I think a lot more can be done in that space. Did you want to add something to that, Dr. Lewis or Dr. Anderson?
No,
go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Lewis.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Anderson. I think I'm having difficulties.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr.
I was
Anderson.
just going to add that another best practice that I've seen is with their churches that are actually doing mental health series. And so my husband and I have been able to go in and have real conversations with real people about real problems. And so I think, to your point, Purvis, it isn't an either or. We're people of faith, but we're also people who work in mental health. And so creating this psychologically safe space with a combination of faith, I think, is critical. And so I'm glad to see that there's this trend where the doors are opening and churches are opening their doors to have these conversations. So the series have been really, really helpful and impactful.
That's awesome. You know, the good Lord or the universe, whatever you believe in, gave us all, you know, these wonderful abilities to heal and help folks. And so you can definitely have hashtags spirituality and therapy, or Jesus and therapy, whatever you want to call it. But we're happy to see that. All right, I'm going to move on to my next question. You talked about it a little bit, Dr. Lewis. Some people say that those who talk about suicide aren't going to do it, or that if you talk about it too much from a preventative perspective, that you may actually be encouraging the behavior. Is there any truth to these notions? And would you like to take that, either Dr. Lewis or Dr. Tucker?
Yes. And, you know, we know, you know, people say it all the time, like, I don't know how to talk to my loved one because I'm afraid I'm going to plant that seed. I'm afraid I'm going to, you know, take that and that's going to make them want to harm themselves. But, you know, we do know that the more people talk about how they're feeling, the more people know that there's support out there, the more that people know that, you know, that, or start to realize that, you know, depression and the way that they're feeling, that, you know, depression's an illness. I think we haven't really touched upon the fact that, you know, the brain is an organ just like everything else. And as a clinician, I have to help my patients to realize people sometimes think it's a character flaw, or they're just not strong enough. They're not praying hard enough, you know, or they're a bad person, which is why they can't get over this. Depression's hard to see. You know, it's easier to see someone who's having a heart attack or, you know, a broken arm, but depression oftentimes presents with, you know, being sleepy, you know, not taking care of yourself, not showing up to work, not showing up for your friends. And so people get labeled as being lazy, or they're, you know, just not caring, you know, caring about their loved ones. So, you know, we have to help people to put in a perspective where they understand it's an illness, and an illness that can be treated, you know, and with treatment comes saving lives. And, you know, the more we encourage people to talk about it, and the more we talk about it with our loved ones, can really probably save a life at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Purvis, I want to ask you, in what ways can friends and family support someone who is withdrawing from everyday life? And what are the next steps if you believe someone is having thoughts of suicide? What can you or should you do?
I mean, I definitely think, you know, that's a very good question, a very scary question, because I think we tend to think that we're doing the right thing, and we're not necessarily doing the right thing, right? And so if you feel like someone is experiencing that they're going to attempt their lives, give them call the suicide hotline, right? We're not anyone's savior. Go to the suicide hotline, right? That's within your capacity. Go to the suicide hotline. As far as being friends and how to support, I think it's really in the space of how we listen, in the safe space that we create. I think a lot of times what's been problematic around that is that we think that we're being a safe space, but we're really being a judgmental space. Mm-hmm. And so we really have to really shift in how we listen, because people can tell how you're listening to them, whether you're listening to them with empathy or you're listening to them with judgment, right? So we have to change the posture of our hearts around how we support our friends and what it means to be a friend. You know, the most important thing about a safe space is that the person leaves with their dignity still intact. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we have to change ourselves and just learn how to just be a support system. We don't have the answers. We just want to listen. If it's just a simple hand touch, if it's I love you, I got you, I understand, that is enough.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Tucker, what are some other steps we can take if you believe someone is having thoughts of suicide?
Something that I want to point out is that when someone is feeling overwhelmed or extremely depressed, they may actually find themselves frozen. And someone mentioned it a little while ago. I can't remember who, but it may look from the outside as though that person is being lazy or they're just not taking care of themselves properly. Well, they may be unable to take care of themselves properly because they are so overwhelmed. So you may actually need to step in and help that person find the help that they need. We can tell somebody, listen, I think it's important for you to talk to somebody, to go see a therapist. They may not have the tools and the resources mentally at that moment in time to be able to figure out how to do that, to figure out how to Google a therapist that they can see, or they may not be able to even think of calling their insurance company just to see their insurance carrier to see who, what providers are affiliated with their insurance. Those are the sorts of things that we may be able to step in and help somebody with when you notice that somebody is really in despair. Something else that I want to point out is that if you really feel that somebody is considering hurting themselves or somebody else, please call 911. Don't hesitate. There is a big shame in that. I've spoken to a lot of parents who have said, well, we didn't want the ambulance coming to the house. I get it. However, you also want your child to be alive and well. Let the neighbors say whatever they're going to say. Let the people down the block say whatever they're going to say. That really doesn't matter when it comes to saving a life. So if you need to activate 911 to get somebody help, please do. You can also, if the person is willing to go with you, and this is easier, I think, probably with young people, with little children, because you can physically tote them if you need to. But you can take people to ERs to have them psychiatrically assessed. If you feel that they are at risk of hurting themselves, you can have them seen by a psychiatrist in the ER or social workers in the ER, and they can help determine whether or not that person needs inpatient level of care in that moment. So that's something to remember also. And then I think, like other people have said, just being, supportive, being open, letting that person know that you are there, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of friendship and love and concern, and that you really want to help them get whatever sort of help it is that they may need. And letting them know that you will be a part of that journey as well, because it can be very scary for people, especially people who are entering into the mental health system for the first time in their lives.
Absolutely. And I think you've kind of answered this, but one of the questions is sometimes I just don't know what to say to someone who's going through depression, right? So it might not be at suicidal ideation, but they may be exhibiting signs of depression, or say they don't want to be here anymore. And obviously that lends itself to suicidal ideation. Is there anything that you can kind of suggest at the early onset of, how to talk to friends and family members or folks?
Are you okay?
I think that can be a difficult conversation.
I think that's a good starter. Just, are you okay? Something seems different, or I've noticed that you haven't been around as much, or I miss you. Is everything going okay in your life? Sometimes these conversations aren't as difficult and complex as we imagine them to be. Sometimes it really is just about the human interaction and asking somebody the very basic information that you want to know. That's a good jump start to get to the root of what's going on, or to help that person open up and talk.
Thank you. Parvis, did you want to add something real quick?
No, I echo.
Oh, okay.
I was just agreeing.
Okay. Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to
add.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Lewis.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add too that, again, when we look at the warning signs, when people start talking about not wanting to be here, it's one thing when you're concerned about someone being depressed and wanting to be supportive and be there for them. But when they make statements about, I don't want to be here anymore, then that's your cue to really ask, what do you mean? Do you mean that you want to go to sleep and never wake up and never act on it because of your loved ones or your religion? Or do we need to be concerned enough that you're having active thoughts of wanting to take your life? Because when someone is having, that's when you call 911. You take them to the emergency department. You get them the help you need. We can't. That's kind of a cry for help. So we need to make sure that people understand when people mention that, you've got to take it to the next level and ask directly, do we need to go get some immediate help?
100%. And I think, we've seen, teens sometimes say, oh, maybe I should just kill myself, kind of throwing that out there as if it was the thing to say, but you just don't know. So you have to take it serious, to your point, and make sure that you're asking those right questions. So thank you both, Dr. Lewis and Dr. Tucker. I want to go to you next, Dr. Anderson. You know, we hear a lot about trauma and trauma in the workplace. How can we address trauma in the workplace, whether it's from inequality, sexual misconduct, discriminations? I could go on and on and on. What would you say to that?
So no, thank you for the question. Before I move to that question, I just want to add to what Dr. Lewis was saying. I was the person who used to do those emergency room assessments years ago. And so sometimes people don't want to make the mistake of making the wrong decision. Go where you know there are professionals who can help and who can assess and who can make recommendations for you. That takes the pressure off of you feeling like you have to make that decision. Utilize the emergency room, because you want to take all of those phrases very seriously, and it will be a very thorough assessment, and they can give you the resources in those facilities that that person may need for the next steps if necessary. So I just wanted to add that. Now, to the workplace, 70% of people at one point or another say that they have experienced workplace trauma, right? And so if you're a leader, which is usually the people that I'm working with, the things that I usually advise is that you work to build a culture of support, right? So training in the space of stress and coping, particularly emotional intelligence, which is something that Purvis mentioned earlier today. So there is that awareness piece. But one thing that I think that some companies are coming around to, and I'm happy to see this, is reducing the stigma and having open conversations. If there's one thing that we've learned through the pandemic, is that we've come into each other's homes. We have worked in a way that we never have before. We've seen our children come into cameras, lenses, and deliveries and all of these things. And so the benefit is that we've talked about so many things that we haven't before. Why not mental health? So making sure that the environment is psychologically safe, that people are aware of the resources that are available to them at their organization, and that you encourage people to use them as peers and as leaders, that it's okay. Everybody has had some sort of struggle at one point or another. That's what makes us human. And then, Shanti, you alluded to this earlier, leading with empathy.
Absolutely.
Really leading and putting people first. That's what helps people feel validated. It helps them feel secure. It helps them address what's going on with them directly without necessarily minimizing it. And then lastly, if those things aren't working and it's you or someone that you know in the workplace, get professional help. Use EAP, use those support groups, use those benefits that you have at work to get the help that you need. That's why you go to work. Utilize HR support. If there's something that's happening that needs immediate attention, get that support from your HR team. And then if that doesn't work, then maybe you need to look at formulating an exit plan and move it to some place that is less toxic or causes less amount of workplace trauma.
All great advice. Thank you so much. We have about 9 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to these last two questions. I'm going to direct this question to you, Dr. Tucker. In my addictions class at PAU, one of the issues is that people have come up against is that counselors and mental health workers are so booked until the next appointment is 2 or 3 months out. What would be something that someone could do if they are faced with this issue in seeking help? And I often get told that a lot, especially the quote unquote better psychiatrists or therapists and people of color. It's so few of us that we just can't get an appointment.
And that is happening all around the country right now. Mental health providers are just overwhelmed because one of the downsides of the pandemic is that it, like someone mentioned earlier, people were starting to recognize new symptoms within themselves and needing that help. The positive to that is that people are reaching out to get help. So a lot of the mental health systems are just completely overwhelmed right now. I had a number of calls today where I had to tell people that we just did not have the availability right now to be able to bring them in and help them. So it's definitely happening a lot right now. It is a serious concern. It's something that I think we all feel very bad about. However, this is when you do reach out to those alternative sources. We talked about the church before. Speak with your church. If you have a child who may be suffering, reach out to the school counselor and see if the school counselor can provide some sessions at school with the child. Use those unconventional resources, within your circle, and see what you can find. If you need people to keep extra eyes on family members or friends, call up a friend and say, hey, I'm concerned about so and so. Can you do a check-in on them every once in a while? Send them a text. Can you call them? Let's just make sure that they're supported right now. So, unfortunately, like I said, the system is overwhelmed right now. Try to get on those wait lists if you can. Go ahead and submit your applications. Let them know that you're interested in being seen when they have availability. But then in the meantime, try to use, whatever resources you have within your system to stay supported, and, reach out to those people who you feel can help you maintain, at least, in the moment, until you can get that appointment. I wish I had a better solution, a more solid solution for you. Maybe some of the other folks can chime in, but it is definitely something that we're seeing across the board.
Quickly, if you guys, because we just have about 7 minutes left, do you want to add something to that purpose?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to add on to what Dr. Tucker said, there are, lived experiences support groups that are counselor led. And so that is another modality as opposed to just traditional one-on-one therapy. So there are lived experiences support groups that you can join at any time. It's kind of cycle in, cycle out. Those are available. So to,
Thank you.
At that as well.
And my last question is going to be for you, Dr. Lewis, so you can add to what to at the end of that, the resources that you have. I also want to add therapyforblackgirls.com is a great resource, therapyforblackmen.org, also betterhelp.com, Taraji P. Henson, if you Google her foundation. What I've seen in the pandemic is a lot of major corporations are pouring money into mental health organizations of color. We even have a resource guide on silence and shame, but a lot of therapists that I work with in terms of educating and creating awareness, a lot of their practices are offering free therapy. So you just got to do the work like anything else. And if you're in a larger city, Google community service boards, because most of the large cities have community service boards and they offer free counseling and therapy sessions. So my final question to you, Dr. Lewis, and then we're going to have everybody leave some parting words for this really great conversation this evening. Some mental illnesses require medications, but many people prefer holistic routines or are fearful of long-term side effects being medicated. Is there any truth to the long-term side effects? And can you regulate your mental health with holistic practices? Is that a good idea or not?
It really depends on how severe your depression is. If you have mild depression where you're just not sleeping well, not eating well, maybe not filling up to and not functioning as well, then maybe just therapy alone, or maybe meditation, yoga, more rest, de-stressing techniques. But when we talk about life-threatening depression, when people are starting to have suicidal thoughts, when people are now not even to the point they're losing weight or not caring for themselves, and maybe about to lose their job, the severity of depression then warrants more than just kind of remedies, because again, depression is an illness. So there are medications that might have to be taken, and although they have side effects, the practitioner job to look at the risks and the benefits, look to see, okay, sometimes we pick the antidepressant based off their side effect profile. Some antidepressants make people gain weight. Sometimes they cause them to sleep. If someone's not sleeping, that might be the side effect medicine that I'm going to pick. Or someone who's lost a lot of weight, I might pick the medication that causes weight gain. There are, the point is that that's why you work with look at the side effects that someone's experiencing, and then tailoring the medicine until we get to that perfect balance. So again, with how you're going to treat it. There's
Thank you.
plenty of treatments that go hand in hand.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's 8:57. We could have another hour or two. This has been so much great information, and we're just so grateful. So We've come to the end. This concludes our first conversation on suicide prevention. We hope that the information shared today by our esteemed guests has been informative and helpful to our families, friends, and community members. We want to make sure that we silence the shame around mental illness while being able to identify triggers and symptoms to help aid those to get the help that they need without the attachment of shame or stigma, right? No more shame, no more stigma. So to our panelists, is there a LinkedIn profile or a social media handle that you can provide for our viewers so they can follow you and all the wonderful work that you're doing? We'll start with you, Dr. Anderson.
Sure. So on LinkedIn, I'm Dr. Angela Anderson, and on Instagram, I am at Dr. Angela Speaks.
Thank you so much. Purvis?
On LinkedIn, I'm Purvis Taylor III, and on Instagram, I'm at Purvis Taylor.
Okay. Dr. Tucker?
With the nature of the work that I do, I'm not on social media, but if anyone has questions about the mental health hospital system within the New York City area, you can feel free to reach me at jennifer.tucker@omh.ny.gov.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Lewis?
And I would say the same thing. I'm on social media, but privately for the most part. Or kind of interaction with the public, but I can be reached at cmajor@jhmi.edu. If there's anyone on this talk, in the audience who needs help finding resources, who needs some questions answered, you can feel free to reach out to me. Our purpose is to help people get the help, make sure, able to be educated, informed about how to best take care of their mental health. So reach out anytime.
Thank you again to everyone. Please make sure that you follow Culture Creators on their Facebook page, the Culture Creators on YouTube, and also the Culture Creators at Culture Creators on Instagram to hear about the powerful programs available to uplift and help our community. Thank you again to our panelists who volunteered their time this evening to give us so much of this much needed information. Purvis Taylor III, Dr. Cynthia Major Lewis, Dr. Jennifer Tucker, and Dr. Angela Anderson. Again, I am your host, Shanti Das, the CEO and founder of the mental health organization Silence the Shame. You can follow my foundation at Silence the Shame on Instagram and on Facebook and Twitter at Silence TH Shame. And you can follow me at Shanti Das 404 on Instagram. Also, we will be emailing you all some Silence the Shame toolkits around suicide prevention. And check out our YouTube page under Silence the Shame TV. We hosted our first inaugural Silence the Shame Suicide Prevention Summit. And so those sessions are available right now on YouTube. So feel free to share those with your friends, family, and colleagues. Thank you again so much for being a part of this safe space and this journey as we continue to silence the shame. And as I always say, make sure you take time, save a life, and silence the shame. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
God bless.